Hello and welcome to Retro Island Diskettes, the podcast where we abandoned a guest on Retro Island, but not before learning about their life story in the computer industry. We'd hate for them to perish with their story untold, wouldn't we, Andrew?
Yeah, that would be truly terrible, Neil. To help our guests tell their story, we'll also play 8 music choices selected by our guest, and these must be tunes of computer origins, such as video games or scene demos. So who's our guest today, Neil?
Well, Andrew, our little podcast must be doing something right to have a man of this calibre offering to be marooned today. He's worked on some of the best-selling and most loved games of the 90s as both a game designer and an artist at Sensible Software. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Stoo Cambridge. Welcome, Stu.
Oh, thank you. That's almost made me cry with being so humble. That's rather nice of you to say. Thanks for having me.
Stu, to kick us off, why don't you introduce your first track and tell us why you chose it?
Well, my first track is from the game called Assualt Suit Leynos, and that's for the Sega Mega Drive. And it's quite a strange one to pick, I suppose, because I don't think it was widely known. And I bought the Mega Drive for an import, and this is one of the games I got with it when I bought. I think I bought a couple of games with it, and this was before I actually joined Sensible. And I'd just come from like the Amiga, and I'd got this machine, and it just blew me away. The soundtrack on it, it's just like wow, because it was actually like having a DX7 in your bedroom, and I always wanted a DX7, and I couldn't afford one. And when I heard the soundtrack to this game, I was like, wow, this is amazing from this little black box. And I've got a Mark I Mega Drive, so you've got the one with the little slidey volume control on the front, and I used to have the wire out the front, and I'd have it connected to my hi-fi, and I'd have it booming out in my bedroom, and my parents were like, "Can you turn that down?"
A cracking tune to introduce yourself with there, Stu, and it takes us back to a time before you worked for Sensible Software, which we'll hear about later in the show. But just take us back to the very beginning, if you will. What was your first computer, and what do you remember about the day you got it?
Well, I got it twice. My first computer was a VIC-20, and I'll tell you why I got it twice. I grew up in Ilford in Essex. And one Christmas, as everybody at that kind of age was looking at getting computers, and we went to this shop. And they had like computers in there. They had like there was Tandy around the corner, and they had all these different computer shops. And there's a VIC-20, and it was on offer. And my dad said, "We'll get you that." Got it back. We tried it out. It was dead, and I was heartbroken. I was like, no, this. So my dad said, well, obviously they've sold a dud. And we had I hadn't actually told this story before, so you're actually quite honoured to hear this part of my little gaming history. So we took it back to the shop, and the guy just didn't want to give us the money back. He was like, well, it was working when we sold it to you, this is the story, how it goes. And so eventually we got the money back, and we went to Boots in the high street, and they had loads in there, and we should have gone there first. And got the VIC-20, and I think it came with, I think it was like a starter pack and that. And I got Abductor, Jeff Minter's Abductor, and I got Laser Zone, and a few other rubbish games that came with it. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, because you know what the VIC's like. It's got a really, really meaty sound chip. It's really sort of arcadey, and I remember plugging it into the TV, and I just sat there and I was like, wow, this is amazing, because at the time there was like Spectrums, there was 64, and I wanted a 64, but my dad said, well, we'll see how it goes, because it could be a fad, you might not be into it, so we'll get the VIC-20 and see We did, and I just fell in love with it. And I did a little bit of basic program, but I never really got into sort of assembler on it. I wish I had actually. It's only when I got a C128 later on I actually got into assembler language. But yeah, it's a great cracking little machine, and I think it's sometimes overlooked. You know, with its big brother, the 64. I think in our school it was either Sinclair or Commodore. And if you was like a bit different and had a few quid in your pocket, you had an Atari, because I think the Atari was quite expensive back then, weren't they? I think the old 800s and the 400s. So, but yeah, I was a Commodore man from the start, I think.
You alluded that you learned 6502 assembler on the Commodore 64, which clearly would have been an essential step in game creation. How did you actually approach this? Did you have a mentor in it, or did you just rely on manuals, books?
I had a good friend of mine who'd had a couple of games published on the 64. There's a guy called Giulio Zecchi, and he was a mentor for me at that time. And he'd got a game called Armadillo, which was published by Codemasters, I think. And I used to go in his house, and he'd sort of show me all the tricks and how to get the sprites in the border and all that sort of stuff. Totally blew my mind because I didn't understand part. But I did start picking up lots and lots of assembler from him, and I had like the programmer's reference manual, the articles in sort of some of the sort of monthly mags. They had those usually pretty good reading, but a lot of it was just taking the printed literature and just trying to trial and error, you know, trying things out and finding out, well, how do I get a sprite to move across the screen? Then once you've done that, well, how can I get it under joystick control? And then before you know it, you've got like a little character walking, you know, running around. And then, okay, well, how do I get it to slow down slowly? I mean, I never really got to the stage where I got a full game finished. I had lots of little routines that would scroll the screen, you know, sprites, and didn't do any sound on the 64, which I kick myself now, because even if I did a simple little sound effects routine, would have been just brilliant. But I only got to scrolling the screen, doing some sprites, and some joystick stuff. So I never really got a full game finished, but I had a few ideas, but I never actually finished them, so which is a shame, really.
But you did have a program come together that was maybe, I don't know if you finished this or not, but there was a game called Battle Ball. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that was, I had to shoot 'em up construction kit, because I was a big fan of Sensible before I was given the job. And I originally used it just to try out some ideas, just the sort of graphics and things. There's a nice little graphics editor in it. And I sort of started knocking up some sort of demos in it. And then I don't know if it was one of my school friends or somebody said to me, well, you could try and get it published. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. And I know that shoot 'em up construction kit games tend to be quite sort of familiar, and to anyone who's seen them, they all look the same, really, don't they? And I recall hacking the front end a little bit, but nothing too special. And nothing you see now where people kind of remove the front end and put their own things on it. And I did that. Took it around to a few companies and kind of got shown the door. So, how dare you bring this to us? You know, you didn't write this. This is just a save export. And then Powerhouse, who I think they were from CRL, the publisher CRL. I think they were. And they had a budget label called Powerhouse. And most of the games on there were pretty naff, as you probably, if you've seen any of their games, they were pretty dire. And and I went there, and I took the disc in with it on, and I was almost blown over when they said, "Yeah, I will have it." You're joking.
Don't you want to see it running? Nah.
Yeah. And I really wanted an Amiga. And I couldn't afford it, because they were like, what was that, 1,400 quid or something? A really lot of money, Amiga 1000. So I was like, okay. Yeah, let's do this. And I can't even remember what I got for it, actually. I think it was like 600 quid or 1,000. I can't even remember what it was. But I know it was enough for me to go with my savings that I'd been saving up for an Amiga, and I can get an Amiga now. And that one little decision, you know, to do that little, you know, shoot up construction kit game, take it to a publisher who was pretty rubbish, they saying yes, and then I got an Amiga. I was like, crazy. And then my dad drove me to, I think it was Huntingdon. They had a few in the country, and we drove all the way from Ilford to Huntingdon to get this Amiga 1000. and that was a great day. That was fantastic. That was just like, yeah, that was one of those moments. I mean, you know, we all love technology, and for me, it was like winning the lottery, because the Amiga 1000 was an iconic machine. So I was like, yeah, I've got one. So brilliant.
So before we continue into your adventures with your Amiga, would you like to introduce your next tune?
My next tune is probably one that I'm not sure many people will know. They might know the game, but this is from an arcade game called Quartet by Sega. And I came across this game when I was on holiday, you know, family holiday. I think we was at Butlins Bognor or Butlins Skegness or one of the Butlins camps. And there's this machine, and I just heard the soundtrack, you know, the usual loop they go through. And I thought, well, that's nice. So I went over to it and played it, and it was nice. Yeah, it's not a bad game, but it's just the soundtrack just stuck with me all these years. And I just think it's got a really nice synth feel to the chord structure and just the way that it plays. It's just got a really nice sound to it, and it's very happy. It's got a very happy tune, and it kind of builds when it starts, and I like that.
Stu, this tune reminds me of the intro to some kind of epic hair rock band of the 80s with those synths. You're in your late teens now at this point. Was hair rock your thing? What did you have in your Walkman?
I don't know if you've seen any photos. There was a few like published of me in my younger days, and I had like big, like Bon Jovi hair, big Bon Jovi, and I used to love it, absolutely love it. You know, I used to have it permed regularly. It was like down to here. I was fantastic. So from that, I was obviously, I think you can concur that I was into rock music. But I used to have like the Iron Maiden shirts and all that sort of stuff. But also, I was into electro and hip hop, which is a bit of a strange thing, I suppose. As well as my synths, I'm very big into Jar and Vangelis and all that sort of stuff. So, but I think at that particular time, I was really, really into rock. Really into rock. So bands like Whitesnake, obviously the Floyd, Led Zepp, prog rock, normal rock, classic rock. So yeah.
So from 1987 to 1990, you were working as a freelance artist. So what games did you work on during this period?
My first game as a freelance artist was a game called Renaissance 1, and that's for a company called Impressions, and that was for classic sort of arcade games. I think it's Space Invaders, Galaxians, Pac-Man, and no, it wasn't Pac-Man, it was Galaxians, Centipede, and Asteroids. And the idea was that you'd have a classic version, which was using graphics which are pretty much ripped off from the arcade, although not quite. And then we'd have a contemporary version, which was where I could basically do what I wanted, and I certainly did. So, and that was brilliant. I had a really, really good time doing that, and that kind of opened the door for me to get more work. And I did loads of projects with them. Did quite a few games with them, but that was the first one that started me off, and it was really good experience. And I do often think if I hadn't got that gig doing that, I would have gone on to get a job as Sensible, because I wouldn't have had a portfolio of work to show, and it might not have gone the way it did. So I'm always thankful for every opportunity that comes my way. I never look back at anything and go, oh, should have done that game, because you don't know where things lead. So everything's happened, and you just go through it, and then that's something you've done, and you move on. And although the games themselves were pretty naff, they weren't particularly great. They opened doors for me, which I can't complain about.
And this freelance work, were you doing it on that Amiga 1000 that you'd bought?
I was, yes.
Yeah.
I had, because the Amiga 1000 didn't even have, it only came with 256k of memory, so we had to get the RAM expansion, which bolted on the front, didn't it? And I wish I'd had a hard drive. I never had a hard drive, so it was all done on floppies. That was, looking back on it, that was crazy. I wish I'd saved up and got myself some kind of hard drive for it. But most of the time it was just me sitting in front of me Amiga with I think I had a 10. Didn't have a 1081. I had a 1902. I think it was a 1902 or 1901 monitor. Had that perched on the top and just drew lots of graphics. And what's really funny is some of the games I did back then, I can actually remember some of the music I listened to while I was doing the graphics. There was a game called The Executioner, and that was with them as well, but they had a different label called Hawk. And for that game, I listened to a lot of The Cure. Listened to that when I was doing the graphics for that. So I don't know if that had anything to do with the look of the graphics, but so it's really, really strange. But yeah, it's great thing, the Amiga. I love it. Absolutely love the Amiga. And
in this freelance period, was work quite forthcoming? Were you in demand?
I was really unknown, so I was trying to get known by a lot of people. I did go around a lot of the publishers in London, and I took a demo disc with me, and I knocked on doors, and a lot of the time we've got artists, we're not really looking for anybody. I had a couple. I had was it Melbourne House? I think they looked at some of my work, and I think they did. Was it the game R? The dinosaurs, the dinosaur game where you had it was like Rampage.
Okay.
It rings a bell. Was it? And they asked me to do a picture of the just to show that what I could do, but didn't get nothing from that. So really, I was quite fortunate that I got this work with Impressions, and that was pretty much up to when I started Sensible. I did a few little bits and pieces for other people in between, but nothing major.
So what was the path your career took to take you from Impressions to Sensible?
I don't know what it was. Computer Weekly or no, it wasn't that. It was a bi-weekly magazine. They had adverts in it and a bit of editorial. And I had game developers at the back who were advertising for staff. And Sensible had an advert in this. And I think it was only like an eighth of a page or might have been a sixth of a page. I saw this advert and they wanted programmers and artists, and I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose, give it a go. So I put together a portfolio disc, made sure it's just without having to do anything, and sent it off. And then I got a letter saying we'd like to invite you along for an interview. I was like, wow, this can't be real, because it's like, imagine like you're into Pink Floyd or you're into like, I don't know, Rush or one of these big bands, and you're the new guitarist. It's like, really? I've only been doing this a couple of years. You want me to join? So I got this interview, and I think they had about a dozen people they'd narrowed it down to, and I've still got the list of the scores that they'd put down, all the artists that had applied, because John and Chris gave it to me and said that's how close it was. And it was me and this other guy, and I think it was like 2 points in it where they was scoring them. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. That I'd got that job over like just a couple of points in the scoring of the work and the style and all the other bits that they'd scored me on. So I went up for an interview at a place called March in Cambridgeshire, which I'd never even heard of, in the middle of nowhere, and in the middle of the fens as well, so it's very flat. And went to this interview and went away, and then they offered me the job. And it was like, wow. But I had to leave. I had to move out of my parents because I can't remember how old I was. It was only like 18 or something, 19, or 20. I wasn't that old. And and I got the job, and I just couldn't believe it. I genuinely couldn't believe that they'd offered me the job.
Yeah. John and Chris being John Hare and Chris Yates, who formed
yes.
Sensible in '86.
Yes.
Was the magazine Computer Shopper by any chance?
Do you know, it might have been. It was. All I know, there was a couple of magazines that were bi-weekly, and they used to they were black and white inside. They weren't colour. I think they had a colour cover, and the rest was just black and white newspaper print. And at the back, they'd always have a few adverts for like game developers, like censorship game artists, programmers, and that sort of stuff. And it was a mixture of editorial and advertising.
Yeah,
and that's what I remember. I just can't think of the name. And I've been asked this before, and I wish I could track down that magazine. I'd love to have the advert, because I haven't got the advert, and I'm sure it's got lost in moving over the years. I'd love to find it.
Yeah, I was only asking because it's a magazine that's come up in our podcast before, with the way that the hacking and cracking groups used to get in touch with each other. So it's interesting that the legitimate game studios were advertising for jobs shoulder to shoulder with the hackers and the crackers.
Yeah, I remember seeing. I actually remember seeing like pen friends. I want a pen friend to swap discs and things with, and it's like you just want a pirate. That's all you want to do. Well, my next tune, I'm sure many people will know. It's from a little game called The Revenge of Shinobi on the Sega Mega Drive, and one of my most favourite games to play on the Mega Drive. Even today, I had my Mega Drive out about a month ago, got it all out, set it up in the TV down here in my studio, and it's just a fantastic game. And the track I like is a track called Chinatown. I think it's the second or third level in? And again, it's just a wonderful piece of music. It's got that oriental vibe going, but it's got that wonderful sound that the Mega Drive can produce, and it's got some great sort of PCM samples in it as well, which kind of reinforce that FM sound, that crispness that you get with the FM. It just brings a lovely sound to it, a nice balance, and it's a great tune.
Well, Stu, we're now at your time in Sensible Software, a software house which gave us Whizball, Sensible Soccer, Cannon Fodder, and Megalomania, amongst other smash hits. Talk us through day one at Sensible Software. What was it like for you walking in and taking your desk at one of the top game developers of the day? It
was very strange because, as I said, I was a big fan. Well, I am still a fan of the 64 stuff. And I remember being quite nervous because I didn't know what to expect. I'd never worked in-house before. I'd only been freelance. So for me, going to see somebody to do work, I'd occasionally worked on site with impressions and some of the programmers I'd worked with, but I'd never actually worked full-time in-house. So for me, it was like, well, what do I expect here? What's going to happen? I was a little bit intimidated by it because for me they were like rock stars of the games world. So but once I met them and gone through the interview process and then started, it was good. I mean, they're such a great bunch. I mean, John and Chris were fantastic. They really were. I mean, they let me get on with what I needed to do, but they just had that little bit of control. So the first day I got there, it was really a case of just setting up your machine, getting your software running how you want. We didn't have a network. There was no network back then, so it was all done with floppies. So it was like, okay, you're going to be sitting there. Is that all right? Yeah, I'll sit there. And I think Jules was over there, and Chris Chapman was somewhere else. He was over that side, and then we had John and Chris's desks. And you just kind of got comfortable in getting in your environment, and you could pretty much do what you wanted. So for me, that freedom was was welcomed, because I think if it had been quite strict, and it's like you've got to start at a certain time, you've got to leave at a certain time, I don't think it would have worked, you know. And I think that's what made it sort of what it was, what Sensible was. It was that freedom, but we all had a common goal. And I think because I had the same kind of views on game development as they did, we all just got on with it. But yeah, it was a great. I mean, I think after the initial first couple of days, I settled in, and it was brilliant, and it was just a fantastic experience.
So, what was your role at Sensible? Were you an artist or a coder, logic designer?
Just pixel artist, really. I mean, John Hare had not done any work with anybody else, you know, in house. He was the sole artist on Insensible, and I think they'd use other artists to help out with some of the title screens on Megalomania was an example. But most of the in-game graphics John did. So for him, it was you know, a case of they needed to expand with another project. He couldn't do it. They needed an artist. So my job was literally just artist, just a pixel artist. And I suppose I could be quite funny and say I was lead artist, but I was just the artist who did all the pixel work. And the funny thing is, one of the first things I did was I just started doing some graphics for Cannon Fodder, you know, just some backgrounds, you know, once we started it. But I think we did. I did the logo. The funny thing is, I did the logo for Sensible Soccer, the little Sensible that comes up, because John was doing one, and I just trying to impress. I did a little 16 color one, and I said, oh, you can have this one, and I gave that to him on his computer, and he used that in the game. Uncredited that was uncredited. That's not fair.
I've got a copy next to me. Let me grab it.
Oh, have you? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
There we go. We've got Sensible Soccer and Sensible World of Soccer.
It's the actual word sensible, or the very first one, which is that on the little one that comes up in the middle of the screen. I did the little one of that, and only because I think he was doing lots of stuff, and I said, well, I'll do it to save you some time, you know, and I did it. I can't remember what the real story, what the full story was for it, but it's something like that.
We'll fire that up later and have a look.
Yeah. The first work I did actually for them, just my brain's fried, and first work I did for them was Sim Brick, because that was an all-nighter I pulled for that, which is a story that's been out there for a while. Again, trying to impress, and I thought, no, I'll do it, you know, I'll do it. I'll spend all night doing it if I have to, and I did, and it was bizarre. So yes.
Tell us about Simbrick. People are going to be going, what the hell was Simbrick? You're going to have to...
Simbrick was... I don't know if you recall, there was a game called SimAnt that came out for the PC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was our kind of like take on like saying, well, how can anybody release a game called SimAnt? I mean, that's got to be so boring, watching ants. I mean, that's the most boring thing you can imagine. It's like standing in your garden and lifting a rock up and going, oh, there's some ants. And just standing there watching, okay, they're moving about. Oh, they've gone in the hole. Oh, there's one, he's come back. So we thought, well, okay, you know, I think John, I don't know if John or Chris came up with the idea of Sim Brick. And the idea was just to drop a brick on an ant. And you'd have to wait for this ant to run across, and then you just click the button and the brick would drop, and then you'd splat the ant. And that was the game.
A Sensible game became instantly recognisable in the 16-bit era with its art style of tiny characters. There was even a tiny Stoo in Cannon Fodder, which I remember burying on Boot Hill. How did this distinctive style of art come about, Stoo?
Right, I think John and Chris are responsible for that look, purely because I think with Megalomania, they wanted to fit as much sort of information or detail into the screen as they possibly could, and the way to do that is to make the sprites a little bit smaller. So taking that and applying it to Sensi Soccer meant you could see more of the pitch. So, and again, we took that and said we want to see more of the play area in Cannon Fodder. So again, we used the same kind of scale, although the sprites are different between Cannon Fodder and Sensi Soccer and Megalomania. They are all slightly different. Again, I mean, John done Megalomania and Soccer, and I did Cannon Fodder, and we've got slightly different graphic styles. So when you look at them close up, they are totally different. But it just works. It means you can see a lot of the game. I mean, obviously now you've got 4K screens with immense amount of detail, you can pretty much fit as much as you can and without needing glasses. So, but back then with a 320 by, was it 240, 256 screen, you was pretty sort of limited what you could get on a screen without it looking like it's a disaster. So it's a very clever move, I think, because it kind of opened up a doorway for us for an image that we were known for. And I don't think that was conscious. I think that was just how it kind of turned out. My next tune is one of my all-time favourite Rob Hubbard tunes on the Commodore 64, and it's Lightforce. Again, it's got such a fantastic sound, which reminds me of the classic electronica that we used to get in the 80s, from Jar, Tangerine Dream, that kind of vibe going with it. And again, I used to have my 64 connected to my stereo when I did in my bedroom when I was a kid, and I'd have that pumping through the stereo. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, I can't believe that this sound is coming out of a Commodore, because it just sounded so good. And even today, there's been people done modern mixes of it, but the original just holds a place there. It's always sounds so good when you hear it again. And I thought, I've got to put it in. This is a very hard choice to make. Having 8 tracks, it was very difficult. There's so many tracks I could have added, but Lightforce had to go in there. So here it is.
Today's developers are issued with well-documented dev kits for the latest consoles in advance of their releases, non-disclosure agreements, and everything that goes with the territory. What did your early 90s dev kit look like when you were creating games at Sensible?
Right, we had a system called PDS, which was effectively just a PC with a card in it that linked to the host computer. So you'd link your PC to an Amiga or an ST or a games console, and then you would just squirt the code down the cable into the machine. You'd have an auto-loading boot disk that would sit there, and when you reset the machine, it would load this bit of code, and you'd just be listening for data coming down on I think it was the serial port or the parallel port, and that was basically it. You could also have, I think the more advanced ones, you could actually have debugging on it, so it would send the data back for code and see what was happening. I never did any of that. This is just from what I knew from watching the guys do it. I used just literally an Amiga. Well, I started from an 1000, but when I started at Sensible, I bought an Amiga 1500, which I saw in your video, which is the one I had, and it was a 2000 rebadged. Yep. I had one of those. And I used that pretty much for most of my Amiga work until we moved offices, and that was my main workhorse. So on that I used DPaint 2 originally, and then I moved to 3, and then I discovered Brilliance, which became Brilliance 2 for some reason. I think Brilliance 2 didn't need a dongle, and then we had that on the Office 2000, and we went on the Amiga 1200. We had Brilliance on there as well, and that was my setup. But the guys use a system called PDS, which I'd love to have actually dabbled with that. I never really got into it because I just didn't have it at the time. But I wish I'd had, because I'm a little bit of a coder at heart. I do love dabbling in all that sort of stuff. I don't think I'd actually finish a game, but I do like to dabble with bits of code. And I was always used to play around the Amiga and use DevPack on the Amiga, which I used to use for doing things like mucking out the blitter and the copper and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
So with success came demand for your titles on other platforms such as the Sega Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. Were you involved in any of those conversions yourself?
Jules and myself did the Megalomania conversion, and that was great fun. That was a real sort of a real gem to work on, because it wasn't just a case of taking the graphics and porting them over, because we didn't have enough memory on the Mega Drive to get all the Amiga bitmaps in. The biggest problem was the Amiga title screens. I don't know if you remember on Megalomania, you had like a loading screens and it had like a story. Well, those screens were drawn in 32 colour. Well, the Mega Drive's only got 16 colours per playfield. So what we did is we split the 32 screen into two 16 colour images, and then you overlay them in the game. But the problem is the Amiga was using the palette of 4,096 colours, and the Mega Drive's only got 512. So again, we had to remap them and do all sorts of bits and pieces with it. But it was just a great thing to do. We had to reconstruct the in-game graphics using characters, whereas the Amiga just had great big graphics that you just slotted together. So I had to take those and scale them and chop them up and repeat them. But the funniest thing is, you'd think that we'd do this on the Amiga, but Jules had come from, I think he'd worked on the Nintendo 8-bit before he'd worked at Sensible, and all his tools he'd written were on the ST. So for me, well, can't you put these on the Amiga for me? And he said, no, they're all on the ST. And I'm thinking, you mean I've got to get my ST out of my dad's loft and yeah. And I went, oh, okay. So on Megalomania, I actually sat there and because the ST could read PC discs, I'd bring the graphics in. I think I used was it CrossDOS or something on the Amiga that let you read PC discs or something? I think I had something like that running, and I'd put the PC disc in the machine, do what I needed to do, put it over to the ST, used Jules's sort of little tool that would chop them up and do the thing, put them back on there, and then say, there you go, and I'd give it to him on the PC disc, and he'd put them in the game. So it wasn't quite. I mean, now you just send it to someone on a network or an email or shared drive. But yeah, it's a very bizarre thing, and I didn't really use the ST a lot, to be honest.
Stu, you mentioned Simbrick earlier.
Yes.
You're also known for fun spin-offs like the Sensible Soccer Christmas special with the Cannon Fodder characters blowing up footballers. I had a little look on your LinkedIn profile and saw a couple more games I'd not heard of, which were unreleased, namely Mirror Signal Manslaughter and Have a Nice Day Office Chair Massacre. What were these and why didn't they see the light of day?
Right, okay. The first one, Mirror Signal Manslaughter, was a game that was very, very much like GTA on the Amiga. And it was, the guys asked me to do a mock-up of this game, which was a top-down view of a street. There is a screenshot which was recovered for me, which I thought I'd lost, because when I left Sensible, some of the data on the machines was on floppies, and some of it was I thought I'd lost forever. But this disc was recovered, and this screenshot was on there. And it's literally like a view. You're looking down on, say, some skyscrapers and some buildings, and you've got roads. And the basic idea was you drive around and you can ram people and run them over and stuff like that. The full game design, I don't think I was privy to see. I don't think I ever saw the full game design for that. I don't even know if we knew what the full game design was at the time. So I did that mock-up, and that's all there ever was with that game. It never got anyone interested in it. I think they did try to show it to a few publishers to get some funding, but nobody really picked up on it. I wish they had, because I think it was a great little game, and it might have changed the way the Sensible ended up, in its final days. It might have, it could have been quite a good IP to have, but it didn't. And the second one, that was a game for the PlayStation 1 before it came out, and that's a game that I was working on with Chris Yates, and that was a 3D kind of first-person shooter in an office chair, and I think there was, from what I just remember, I think it was to do with office politics in the actual game, and you used to go around and you'd be in your office chair and you could shoot like fellow workers and on different floors. And again, I didn't have the full game design. I was just doing some concept graphics for it. But it ran into technical difficulties. We didn't have I don't think we had a very good 3D engine because the PlayStation was new. So, there's no kind of like 3D engines you could sort of license or use. So it was all written from scratch. Chris was getting to grips with the machine, but I think it just didn't happen. I don't think we could get it working, to a sufficient speed for it to be playable. I never saw a decent playable version of it. The versions I saw of it were always a bit slow, and the graphics were always a bit sort of iffy in places, even though I did them. So, and that was my first foray into 3D as well. I was doing all the 3D levels for that, the 3D Studio for that, and it was very, very sort of different to what I'd been used to. But as I said, it would have been nice if it had got a publisher interested and actually sort of got signed to someone, because it might have changed the way that Sensible ended up going. My next tune is a game that I used to play quite a lot. I bought a Super Nintendo when I was at Sensible, and I'd got it. It was a Japanese Super Nintendo, and one of the games I bought with it was a game called Super Adventure Island. And because as you've probably gathered, I'm quite a big Mega Drive fan, and I love the sound of the Mega Drive. The SNES just had a totally different sound, and the track on this game was just nothing I'd heard on a video game before, because it was so different. And it's the stage one track for Super Adventure Island, and it just had this amazing upbeat sort of beat. It had samples, and it was just a very, very happy track. And I used to sit there, and I'd be in my chair, and I'd be like playing it, and I'd actually be dancing while I'm playing it, because it's such a happy track. So I'm picking that one for my next track.
From the outside, there seemed to be a great sense of camaraderie at Sensible Software. Gary Penn described Sensible in an interview with Metro as being comparable to the British music scene of the 60s and punk rock. Is this how it felt to be a Sensi?
I was quite shy, believe it or not. I was quite shy at the time, so for me, I don't think I embraced that kind of rock group image that we had. I loved all the stuff we did. Although I did have quite long curly hair back then, so I probably looked the part. Yeah, I think so. I mean, we all got on really well. We really did. It was a real, it's a real kind of close development team. We used to just get on with the job, but we spent so much time together in the office, working on the stuff. So I think if you didn't get on with your fellow workers, then that kind of mix wouldn't have worked so well. And I think that showed in the end results. So yeah, we did have a good laugh. I mean, one of the things that sticks in my mind is certainly making the videos that we shot for the games. Like we did the Sensible Soccer one, which had Captain Sensible. The first music I did was by Captain Sensible, which was we did a photo shoot in Wembley. And then we did the Cannon Fodder video, we did the actual Sensible World of Soccer video, we did Cannon Fodder video, and Sensible Golf. We did a video for Sensible Golf as well. So, but all those things all were part of that image that I don't think I was even aware of what was going on half the time, because I was like, it's like we're doing a video next week. It's like, okay, right, where are we going? We're going to like Castle Hedingham in Essex. Okay, that's just up the road. Okay, what we're doing? We've got to get some military uniforms, and we're going to ride in the back of like this old army jeep. It's like, right, okay. It's just bizarre, but it's great. I mean, I'm glad we did it, because now looking back, I think, wow, it's something to look back and think, yeah, I'm glad we did all that stuff. But yeah, we were a good team, and we enjoyed what we did, and I think that did show. And we all got on. There was never any arguments. I don't ever recall falling out with anybody at Sensible. And I'm still friends with a few of the guys now, so it's good. One day Chris Yates went out and bought some radio control cars, and I think we had, I think it was four radio control cars, and we used to be based in March in Cambridgeshire, and we was based in a building that was right next to the railway station, and next to the railway station there was a siding which was never used, and you could walk up and you could see the track, and we used to launch these cars off the platform onto this track, and because they had quite good suspension on them. But I remember we had this bank of battery chargers in the office, and it was a bank of battery chargers. And we had this box with loads and loads and loads of rechargeable batteries. So there was always batteries being charged. So we had, and that was, and for me, I mean, I'd only been there a few months, and I'm thinking, this is cool. I like this. This is, this isn't work. I'm sitting here playing with radio control cars. And there's plenty of little stories like that. I mean, one of the other ones I had, they were playing football in the office, and I don't know if you've seen those. They're like sand sculptures, and they have like an oil in them, and the sand, you turn it, and the sand moves, and it makes different patterns. I had that on my shelf unit behind me, and I think I'd gone downstairs to make a coffee, and I come up, and somebody had booted the ball and smashed it. Well, I don't generally get kind of like upset very easily, and I just got really distressed. I was like, what the hell? Who's done that? And I think it did kick off that day, because literally, and but generally speaking, most of the time it was good fun. But I mean, we had loads of little laughs. I mean, there was the time where Chris Yates took the EEPROM out of the one of the pinball machines and changed all the words for rude words, and quite rude words if I recall, because he'd had an EEPROM programmer, and he thought, well, I've got an EEPROM program and I'm not as scared to use it, and so he took the chip out of this pinball machine and changed all the words on it and put it back, so anyone playing this pinball would be greeted with all these words which shouldn't be there. So
as we move into the mid-90s, Sensible turned their hands to another genre, and this time it was the point-and-click adventure game with a title called Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. Were you a part of this project? And if you were, what can you tell us?
No, I wasn't actually, no. I was working on Sensible Golf, and what else? I was working on Sensible and Sega Worldwide Championship Soccer 2 at the time. And we had, in our office in Saffron Walden, we had, I think it was 3 floors. You had the ground, first, second floor. Next to that office, we had like a courtyard, and there was like the garage had offices which was connected to our offices, but we didn't actually have those as part of the Sensible lease agreement. So because the game needed so much artwork doing, they actually took a lease out on this adjoining office, and they filled it with a team of artists who were doing 3D rendering and 2D illustration work. So this game was becoming massive. I wasn't part of it. I was still doing like all my pixel graphics, but it took over, and it got to the point where the game was becoming so big that it was kind of dragging everything into it. It was like a black hole. It was sucking everything out of John and Chris. Their attention was always on it, and it's a shame because the soundtrack is great. John gave me the CD of the music years ago, and it's just a great piece of music. His soundtrack's awesome. I think the graphics are quite dated now. If you see any screenshots, it's got kind of a bit of a charm about it. But it's just a shame it never really sort of went further than it did. I mean, I think they couldn't get a publisher in the end for it, because of the content was quite explicit. It was the title says it all, and it literally was that. There was lots of all of that in the game.
I think there was about 4 years sunk into that, wasn't there?
Yeah, 4 years and an awful lot of money. I mean, it cost an absolute fortune to develop, and it never materialised. Yeah.
As technology moved on, the 16-bit era drew to a close, and Sensible Software, like any software house, would have to adapt and grow to cater for the new generation of consoles, the growing PC market, and the death of the Amiga. Did Sensible adapt well to the new generation?
No.
Just no. The CD32 was the last of it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the old. Although we did have a little brush with the CD-TV. We did have a little brush with that. I think we did Sensi Soccer for that. But that became a karaoke machine in the office eventually. Yeah, I think it was difficult. I think we just didn't. I mean, I certainly saw the writing on the wall during Sensible Golf when I was working on Sensible Golf. I saw that, as I just mentioned, with Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, that was taking so much of the resources of the company, and it just. I could see that it was just not going anywhere. And I would go down to make a coffee. I've said this before. I'd go down to the kitchen to make a coffee, and there'd be people in there I didn't even know who they were. I'd never even met them before, because I was using so many different artists to get these renders done and get these models done and get this artwork finished. It was just taking so much. So for us, the transition from 2D to 3D was a very tough one. I think if we'd have prepared for it earlier, I mean, the power of hindsight, we could have had things in place to support 3D on the consoles and on PCs. I mean, we struggled with the PlayStation. I mean, we just didn't. I mean, with Have a Nice Day, I mean, that was running quite slow. And it's a shame, because I think it would have been a really good game. I think it would have had that sensible feeling about it, and it would have been on the PlayStation, and it would have been different. But it didn't work. It was too slow. Technically, it just couldn't. It just wasn't enough. And I think when they did I'd left when they did the 3D Sensi Soccer on the PC. I think I was in the process of leaving at that point. And I've never actually seen it running, but I've heard people talk about it, saying it was quite choppy. It wasn't particularly great, and that's a shame. When you look at the heritage of the games library that was under the belt of Sensible, it's a shame that it kind of was up here and then it kind of just went like that. Maybe we should have planned earlier.
We'll learn about your departure from Sensible next, but before we do, Can you tell us your next track, please, Stu?
My next track is going back to the 64, which is a fond favourite of mine, and this was quite a tough one, because there are two tracks in this game which I absolutely love, and either one of them could have made it into this slot. And that game is Rambo, composed by Martin Galway. And I've chosen the loader, the tape loader for this one, although I was looking to do the title screen, but the loader won it for me in the end. Again, it starts off and you think, what is this? You've got the Morse code going in the background, and then it kind of builds up, it comes in. It just sounded like nothing I'd heard before coming out of the 64. It just had this really kind of powerful synth sound, which was different to what Rob Hubbard was doing. It was equally good, but it was different, and it just showed another dimension to the quality of that SID chip, which, considering when it was designed and built, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
meat of it now.
This is the serious bit, is it? Yeah, okay. Stu, all good things must come to an end, and after 7 years at Sensible Software, it was no different for you. Talk us through when and why you moved to Pastures New.
Well, I was working on Sensible Golf. I'd had a bit of a disappointment with that project because I could see that the resources of the company were being drained by sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The feel of the place just wasn't the same. You know, when we was a close team, I think there was about 5 or 6 of us. It was a great environment to work in. But when you're in an office spread over like 3 floors and there's people in there you don't know, something changes. It just wasn't the same place anymore, and I hate that. I just hate the fact that I felt like that, you know, because I joined it before, you know, before we hit the Amiga big. I'd been there through all the Amiga years, and to leave before it sort of finished, it was a tough decision to make. But I had to make that decision. You know, I had a young family at the time. I thought, well, I don't want to be working late nights for too long on stuff where I know it's not going to go anywhere. So I made the decision to leave, and a friend of mine I'd worked with there, he, you know, we sort of had a couple of ideas for games. I designed a game which was literally based roughly on the NES game Kick or Cubicle. I used to play that a lot on my Nintendo, and it was a game called DJ Fresh. And Adventures in Dreamworld, and that was literally a game on the Amiga. It was going to be an Amiga game, and we took it around to a few publishers. And after a few people saying no, not interested, we had Telstar said they'd be interested in taking it, but could we turn it into a 3D platform game, which was bizarre because the game wasn't originally designed as a 3D platform game. But we could see that the story and the narrative that I'd written and put in there and we put together could be adapted for that, would fit that. And because we were desperate for a deal, we thought, well, why not? You know, someone's offering you a wad of cash to do this game, which you hadn't even written yet. We just had a very simple demo. Well, let's do it. So I you know, we went away. We had to do a big big sort of development sort of schedule and a development guide of what the story was going to be and the game design, and we did that. And we got the deal, but I was still contracted to do Sensible Golf and I think Sega World Championship Soccer 2. So I was literally juggling both things at the same time for about 3 or 4 months. But the funny thing is, I during that time I could see the things were going quite badly at Sensible because the resources were just being drained. And John and Chris were really sort of just totally, you know, having to get this thing done, and it wasn't going well. So I left, you know, and that was it. And I left, and we got offices in Braintree. We started a company called Abstract Entertainment Limited, and we got some, you know, staff, and we started developing on this project, you know, and that was it. And I left Sensible, you know, and I felt bad because I'd like to have stayed, but when you could see the ship is sinking, you think, well, do I stay and stay with the captain, or do I jump in that lifeboat that's been handed to me, which means that I can pay my mortgage and I can keep my family fed, and that's what I did. Yeah.
So your move to set up Abstract Entertainment is very understandable. But before we go straight into that, can you let us know what actually happened to Sensible? You know, around that time, you're sort of saying it's in decline now. Was there much life left in it?
When I left, the Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll was in full pelt. They were desperately trying to get it finished. It had serious programming issues. It just wasn't working. I think the writing was on the wall. I mean, I didn't know the time scale that that it was going to die. But it looked like, unless something was going to happen, sort of drastically change the mood of the place and the way that the finances were being paid out, that was it. And I know that they couldn't get anybody to fund the last few sort of stages of the games. So for me, it was really quite sad to see it, you know. I mean, I'm looking at it from with experience and hindsight now. At the time, I wasn't fully aware of it. It was only when I've looked back and analysed it, I'm thinking, yeah, you knew what was going on, but you didn't quite understand it. So and it wasn't like, we're gonna be going down the drain now. See ya. It was a very sort of, let's rescue it. Let's try and do that. But I was out of it. I was only contracted to do Sensible Golf and then the Sega game, and that was it. And I didn't have no contract left. I didn't have any other contracts up for renewal. I mean, Have a Nice Day was finished because, again, nobody wanted to take it on. No publishers wanted it. So that contract had expired. That wasn't going to go anywhere. So I had no option, really. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to do something else before there was no negotiations.
Yeah. And it was Abstract Entertainment where you worked on a title. I think it had a slight title change. It's now called Joe Blow Adventures in Dreamland. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, we took it to Telstar. They didn't quite like the idea called DJ Fresh because he was a rapping radish. The whole idea was that he was this little hip radish that rapped, and he had this graffiti spray which was cool, and he could spray it and he would freeze the baddies, and then you could push them. They didn't like that, so they said, "What about if we make it so that he's like he has cool breath?" I thought, well, we can do that. And then
you're okay with the radish?
Yeah, I know.
Okay with that.
And we came up with this. We had a while trying to get a character design going, and then Andy Everett, who was the character artist on it, he started fiddling around with some ideas, and he came up with this character which was like a monkey. And Telstar already said we'll call it Joe Blow. So I said, "Oh, that's the character," which became Joe Blow, this little monkey with his tail, and he had his like white T-shirt on with the logo and little blue bits on him, and his little trainers, and that was it. And that was the start of this 3D game we were developing.
And you were the creative director there, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
As a director, did you find that you were less hands-on with the game itself? Was it a small enough company that you had to roll your sleeves up and get involved?
I mean, the original split between me and Chris was that we had, that's Chris Denman, is that I would be basically in charge of all the creative stuff, and he'd be in charge of all the music and programming, and together we'd kind of run the company stuff. So I tried to be less hands-on, but unless I was needed. And we had like a character artist, we had texture artists, 3D artists, animator, and an illustrator. So we had a good team, and I was quite fortunate to get a good team of people. We interviewed quite a few people, and we just found the right people to do the work. The art team was fantastic on that game. All the guys that worked for us on that were just great. They were just really talented. They did a good job. But I did sort of do a little bit of the 3D level design. I did a little bit of 3D modeling on it, and I did some of the texture work. But most of the time, I knew that it's best to let people do what they're good at and just kind of steer them, rather than get involved and try and put your mark on it. If you're good at management, you can steer the people to do what you want them to do, but bring out the best qualities in their work and let them shine. Which is what I kind of learned at Sensible, really. I mean, that's what I did. I mean, John used to leave me to do stuff, and if he wasn't quite happy with something, which wasn't very often, he would say, "Look, can we try it like that?" But most of the time, it's just getting people to do what they're good at and steering them, and that's what I did.
So Abstract Entertainment took you to the year 2000, and then you pop up the next 2 years later, where you've moved on to mobile phone games.
Yes.
So let's have a quick think there of what mobile phone games were like
in 2002.
Bloody awful.
Well, I can tell you the best-selling handsets in that year were the Nokia 6100 and the 6610.
Oh, they ring a bell, those do.
I'm guessing a lot of Snake.
Yes. Oh, they were real pain to work on. I mean, because screens were like, I think the Series 40 Nokia is like 128 by 128 pixel screens, with what was the colour? I don't know how big the colour screen palette was on them, but they were just awful because they were slow. You couldn't do a lot of work, a lot of sprite work on them. But people were buying them. We didn't make loads of money out of it. I mean, I certainly didn't make loads of money out of it. I went back to freelancing once Abstract closed, but it was just something that we thought we'd try and do, but it didn't quite work. The sales weren't big enough, and it was a lot of work because what happened is a lot of people bring out phones, and there were different screen sizes. So you then had this situation where you'd have to adapt for different screen sizes, and then somebody else bring another screen size out. And you think, well, hang on a minute, my game's got to run on 30 different screen sizes here, or 30 different specifications of phone. You know, some have got more memory than others, some have got a faster processor, some have got a different version of mobile Java than others. And you think, well, this is ridiculous. You know, I mean, you're used to working on a machine that may have maybe two variants, you know, like an Amiga, for instance. You might have somebody who's got an Amiga 500 and somebody's got an Amiga 1200. And you think, well, okay, they will run the same games, but there are subtle differences between the two, which you can test for. But all of a sudden, you've got a machine which is almost like an endless variant. You think, well, not much fun, you know. I had a few years doing that, but I was glad to see the back of mobile phones, to be honest.
And do you remember waiting like 3 minutes for Java to load before you could even play your game? It was a nightmare.
Yeah. I imagine, Neil, that you would have been an owner of a Nokia N-Gage.
No, I didn't have an N-Gage. That was 2003. I didn't have an N-Gage. Work gave me a Nokia communicator.
Oh, yes.
With the keyboard, the clamshell. Oh, I love that. Yeah. I never had the Matrix one, though.
Oh, I had one of those.
No.
Yeah. Just a bit of plastic that flopped down, really, didn't it?
Yeah, and cost an extra £200.
That was the hacker's delight, that phone, wasn't it? Like a hacker's delight.
We didn't touch on what the eventual outcome of Joe Blow was. What happened to Joe Blow,
Yeah.
Stu? Did it get released?
It didn't. We had basically my business partner at the time left the company. We had a programmer who left us a week before ECTS with no demo, which was quite horrific. Bear in mind that Telstar were funding us, and they was like, "Well, where's our money? Where's our money being used?" And we said, "Well, we've got this thing." Yeah, well, that's lots of art and the game. Where's the game? So, well, the game's running, but we've got a bug in it, and the guy left. He just ran off one night. It was like, you know, you come in, you think, well, what's happened? A week before ECTS. So luckily at the time I was interviewing for an artist to help with some of the 3D models, and he actually was a programmer as well, and he was a very good programmer. And art was, he's kind of like, you know, was something he did as an extra. And he kind of rescued it. He rescued the project for us, and I gave him a job. I said, "I'll give you a job if you can get this fixed and get us a demo for ECTS. You've got a job." And he took over the project as a lead coder. I went back to Telstar, got some extra funding. I was running it on my own then, and got a PlayStation coder in. Ash Hogg, who's a fantastic guy. Chris Daniels done all the PC code, and we built a new 3D system, which we used for the final build of the game. The game was 3 years in existence, Abstract, and we spent a year doing the first version. Then we had this disaster before ECTS. We literally had to reboot the code from scratch after ECTS, which was a real blow to us, no pun intended.
Hopefully fast the second time round.
It was great. I mean, it was fantastic because we also supported DirectX, which was new. You know, we had DirectX support. We was using 3D effects cards, which were amazing, and the game was looking really good. You know, we had lots of stuff in there. I mean, the little character Joe Blow, he could run, he could jump, he could hang on to the ledges, he could monkey bar, he could swim. You know, he could shimmy across things. He could do all sorts of things. We had a great collision system, and it was going really well. And then just near the end of I think it was just before we got to the end of 1999, the finances started to suffer because Telstar, I think, were basically running out of money. I don't know the full ins and outs of what happened as far as their company was concerned, but I believe the parent company was looking to pull the finances in, and certain projects had to go, and unfortunately ours was one of them. And we did look around for somebody to take over and help finish it, but you know, it was too much of a job for somebody, so it all went down the pan, and that was it really. So that was no more Joe Blow and no more Abstract.
Stu, would you like to tell us what your next track is and why you've chosen it?
My next track is an arcade game, another Sega arcade. I must have a thing for Sega here, I don't know. But again, this goes back to when I used to go on holiday with my parents and my brothers, and we'd go to Butlins every year. And one year we went to Butlins in, I don't know, it was Clacton before they closed it. But the game was Space Harrier. and they had the full cabinet where you sit in it and you moved about, and I was hooked. I was hooked on that, and I think I didn't. I don't know if I completely. I think I nearly completed the game. But the theme tunes for that is one of those theme tunes that will always stay there, because it just edged you along. You're playing it, and you know, and with the speech samples that would come over the top when you're playing it, like get ready and you're doing great. Just a wonderful bit of music, you know, proper arcade music. I'd say that's for old-fashioned arcade music.
We're seeing you increasingly in the retro world with interviews at places like Retro Gamer magazine and on the Retro Hour podcast. Are you dabbling with retro gaming yourself, or are you just being polite in sharing your memories with saddos like us?
Well, as a fellow saddo, I'd have to say I am dabbling in retro gaming. I don't actually think it ever went away for me. I've always had a soft spot for the old machines. Even when we was playing, you know, when I was doing sort of stuff on the mobile phones, I'd always wanted to, you know, get my Mega Drive out or set up a Jaguar or something. I mean, I've got pretty much most of them. I mean, just before Christmas, I had the PC Engine out, and I was frustrated I only had one game. All my games have gone somewhere else, and I don't know if they're in my mum and dad's loft or they're in my loft. And I thought, I really want to get them set up. But I have actually been going through and setting all my old machines up, and I'd like to. I mean, I've worked out my studio at home, and I would like to have them all set up if I can. Space, I don't think I'd want them all out at the same time. But I do say I had the Mega Drive out a while ago, and that was brilliant. PC Engine, I think I only had Renegade on it, which was a bit tiresome after a zillion goes. But yeah, I mean, I love it. I love it, and I think there's a charm to the retro games that you don't get now, and I think that's what, you know. And I think it's a mix of nostalgia. You know, you bring back to times when you're excited about the new machines that were coming out and the hardware that was in them, and just the fact you could play arcade games at home. Like I said before, it's just that tapping into that nostalgia buzz that you get. So yeah, I'm very much into retro gaming. I'm not so much of a collector. I tend to just play the stuff I've already bought years ago.
Stu, you might be able to help me with something though, because I'm a fuddy-duddy, and we know that. And I hear the terms retro gamer, and I go to the retro expos. But for me at heart, I think you touched upon this. I don't see it as a difference. I just see it.
It's gaming.
It's just gaming. Yeah. Now, is retro gaming? Is it actually kind of a modern thing? Is it for young people who weren't around at that time when those machines were released?
That's a good question. I mean, I've got my two sons. I mean, I've got a 15-year-old boy and a 12-year-old, and neither one of them have they've got no interest in retro games, in old games. They're quite happy to play on the PS4 and the Xbox One, the 360, and the Switch, and they're quite happy to play on those. And I've offered to show them some of the games down here, and they no interest, and it's like, well, why don't you want to play these games?
Because you worked on them, Dad, and that makes it uncool.
It makes you like really sad, and it's like, you know. But and I think it's a real shame. So I don't know whether, I mean, I haven't been to any retro events, so I've never been to any of these retro markets or these retro things that are happening. I I don't know whether the demographic of attendees are mostly our sort of age, 21, or or they're like, the younger generation. I don't know.
I think
you guys probably know more than I do.
I think thinking about it, it's quite a broad spectrum,
Really
and I think the older attendees, I think we tend to congregate and chat a little bit. But if you look in the people who are buying stuff on the market thing, there's definitely a lot of young people there.
A lot of young people. They're making a beeline mostly for the Mega Drive, the Super Nintendo. They're going for the cartridges, aren't they? From what I can gather. Stu, would you like to introduce your next tune, please?
My next tune is another something going on here. I didn't realise, but it's another Sega arcade game. I mean,
Sega royalties.
Yeah, it's all right. You give me the checks in the post, is it? Okay. It's Fantasy Zone, the original Fantasy Zone on Sega Arcade, and I didn't know the name of this tune, and they've got it down as Opa Opa, which I've only just learnt this, but it's one of those tunes that's just such a happy, jolly little tune, and it's one of those ones where you can imagine everything in your room just doing that little sway. like those old Disney cartoons when in the 50s or the 60s where they'd have that little all the things bopping along.
Yeah. Steamboat Mickey, just sort of bopping.
That's it. Yeah.
I think Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo, the opening, the screen, the overworld screen, everything's like dancing along to the music.
To me, it's got that vibe, and it's a great little shoot 'em up, it's a great little game, but it's got that thing going where it's just a happy tune, and I always feel like it's like the sun's shining, it's a lovely summer's day, and you've got this lovely little boppy tune. You're walking down the street, and everything's wonderful in the world. And that's I sound like a total lunatic, don't I? But anyway, that's Fantasy Zone for me. Anyway, that's my little take on that tune.
Walk us through, what's next for Stu? Have you got any plans?
Well, my first plan is to go and make a cup of tea once I spoke to you guys. But after that, I think well, to be honest, I don't really do a lot of video game work these days. So I feel like that's kind of run its course for me. I do the occasional work for people when they want to, they've offered me some money and say, would you draw some graphics for us? Happy to do that, always will be. But in recent years, I've written a lot of stuff, and I've got lots and lots and lots of ideas for stories and books. So I think that's where I'm going to probably be heading. Writing and illustrating books. So I've got a series of books I want to write and illustrate, and there's a lot of work to do. But I think that's probably where I feel I'm being pulled. If that, I feel like I'm being drawn into that direction. As a game developer, you always have to write stories. You have to write design documents and game briefs and treatment documents. And along the way, you kind of pick up, that there's things in there that you think, well, that's too good for that game. There's a lot of stuff that comes out, so you think, well, I'll save that idea for something else, or, And a good example of that is the game I did with a friend of mine, Mark, who we did the Blobbit games with. That's a prime example of taking an idea for a game, which is a very simple game, and then my brain just running off with ideas and just coming up with all these stories and characters and locations and everything that goes with it, and turning it into something more than just what it originally started off, which was this little game. So and that's one of the ones I've been working on. But I think that ahead next in my career. And as I said, I'm going to be turning 50 later this year, so I think for me it's nice. It'd be nice to sort of close that door and leave it ajar, so that if somebody wants to peek through and say, "Hey, do you want to do some graphics?" I'll say, "Yeah, no problem."
Take my money.
Just give us the money. Give us the money. I'll draw anything.
Oh, you may regret that.
As long as the money's on that table, I don't care. But in seriousness, I mean, that's where I think I'm going to be heading. I mean, I do lots of drawing. I do lots of writing. As I said, I've got lots of ideas, and I just need to get them into some kind of structure where I can say, right, do that one, and just keep going.
Stu, you now have 2 important decisions to make before we leave you on Retro Island. You can pick only one of the 8 tracks you've shared with us today to keep you company. Which will it be, and why?
All right, okay. I think, to be honest, I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be Quartet, and I was actually looking at Revenge of Shinobi, but I think it's going to be Quartet. And it's probably a really stupid, silly reason, but the chords that they use in it reminds me of listening to a Journey. So the rock band Journey. Yeah. It just, and I think that's what that is. I think that gives me that kind of little bit of happiness when I hear it. It's like listening to a Journey album. So
excellent. And you can pick one game or application to enjoy on Retro Island. The only condition being that it has no internet connectivity. What will you take with you?
Can it be on any machine or anything like that?
Anything you like.
I would probably pick. I would pick Critter, the drawing app, which is for use of your tablet or your screen, because then I can sit and draw loads and loads and loads. Is there an endless power supply with this island as well?
There might be some offshore power,
yeah. There's
some wave power.
Is it solar power?
Of course.
Solar power, wave power. So yeah, I would definitely take a copy of Critter with my graphics tablet, and I would do that. And what was the other item?
That was it. Just one game or application. You've used your wish.
No, I can see it sailing off into the sunset. No, it would be that. It would be a drawing application, because then I could sit there and just draw stuff and create stuff, and I'd be happy. I'd be happy on my little island drawing and creating stuff.
Eating coconuts.
And fighting off them bleeding crabs that keeps crawling up the shore and biting me toes.
So you made your choices, and we hope they serve you well in your survival on Retro Island. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Stu, for your time today and for your contribution to the games that we so know and love. And if you enjoyed the show today, then please do take a moment to check out our other podcast episodes. And you can find more retro goodness on my YouTube channel, RetroManCave.
And you can find me on the YouTube channel BackOfficeShow, to which you'll find links in the show notes, as well as to Stu's music choices and his website. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.